Altered Carbon episode 4 review. Okay, this episode seemed to be sort of split into two kind of main bits. One was Kovac and his interrogation and sort of AI torture chamber, and the second is Ortega's Day of the Dead party with her family, which uncovers some new stuff and also highlights again what I've already mentioned in the previous episodes about how crazy and murky this world is in terms of Ortega's grandma, which I'll go into in a bit. So firstly, looking at Kovac. Obviously, at the end of the last episode, he was taken by some people and basically trolleyed off to what seemed to be some sort of clinic or ward. And we now see him in there, laying basically on a bed, and he's plugged into this system, and he's basically going to be interrogated by this, I believe is the brother, possibly, of one of the guys Kovac attacked in the first episode, the guy with the punk hair, who I also mentioned, I think that might not be his face because I'd seen it sort of digitally change and stuff in the sort of promo video. We've obviously since learned in this episode that appears to be more the fact that he was in this AI chamber rather than actually that's his face and he's got some sort of weird, clever thing sort of disguising himself. So the interrogator thinks that Kovac is a guy called Riker, which makes things kind of complicated because Kovac has probably got all sorts of information that people would want to interrogate out of him. However, the person that's interrogating him at the moment doesn't know who Kovac is and thinks he's somebody else, which obviously you would suspect is the previous person using this sleeve, or possibly the owner of the body in the first place, which does develop later in the episode. But what we also see through this whole AI training is some flashbacks to Kovac when he was potentially actually Kovac, the proper Kovac, and him being trained as I think is sort of one of the rebels or whatever, how to resist. And the girl or lady who we think he's in a relationship or was in a relationship, Quell Falcon I think her name was, she's sort of doing this training and showing them how to resist the AI, and in essence, the idea is to sort of control it, understand that it's not really real, even though you experience all sorts of pain. There's various things that Kovac was getting put through, losing his legs, getting burnt to death. There was horrendous stuff, so it would be the sort of stuff that generally would be able to make people break. I would have thought, I'm no expert torturer, but if waterboarding seems to do it, then I would have thought burning people's or cutting people's legs off or burning them to death certainly would have an impact. One of the things I did pick up actually on the flashbacks and also plays into the Day of the Dead conversations dinner party that I'll talk about in a bit is the device the guys were using in the flashback to sort of plug into the AI system to do this training. They're in the sort of the woods, and this device that they're using, like the sort of VR set that they all sort of plug into, it seems to be sort of mostly made of stone and stuff. And Ortega mentioned something about the ancients in this dinner party. Like I said, I'll go into this in a bit. But it's interesting that where they are and everything, I think there might be a little bit more to that. And the technology they're using, I don't think is created by human beings. But in terms of back into the interrogation, one of the things which we saw before he sort of went under as such is that Kovac could see to his right, I think it doesn't really matter which side, someone's body sort of opened up in this clinic, and what seemed to be them taking all these organs out. And that appeared to be the prostitute girl from the brothel that sort of screwed him over in the previous episode, and then they slit her throat. They seem to be taking her to pieces. There was also a little image of her blonde wig on the floor as well, which I think sort of kind of referenced that. And that seemed to motivate him if he needed it, in terms of how much he disliked the people that is running this interrogation and the whole sort of computer system that's being used and these operator guys that were doing it and everything. And we do see through various things, various sort of conversations go on with Kovac and this interrogator, but nothing I think that was particularly too insightful. A lot to do with the fact that this interrogator thinks that Kovac was Riker. But Kovac does eventually manage to sort of manipulate this AI system. And as the training was, I think she said something along the lines of, let them think you're weak until the moment they discover you're not. So you sort of, you play sort of, not possum, but that kind of thing. But actually what you're doing is sort of controlling your mind and understanding how it works and then sort of manipulating the system. Something along those lines anyway. To which he does, which then gets him out of the sort of the AI thing. And he's back in the sort of real world, so to speak. And he says to the guys in there that have sort of tied him down and are doing this whole computer stuff, you don't know what trouble you're in for. And he references the GSEC thing, I think, again, or he's a GSEC agent, and then they start to sort of panic. I think it was GSEC. Now, he mentioned this before about how I think he actually really was one of these, but I don't think this is obviously where he got it, unless that was the GSEC training. I'm getting a little bit confused with all of that. But what he offers is to these sort of two computer engineer guys, the one of you two that basically frees me, I won't kill, but I'm going to kill everybody else. To which they release him, and then he does actually kill everybody. As far as you can tell, he massacres every single person. It looked like the Russian guy got away, but we later see Kovacs walking down the street with his head in his hand, which clearly showed he wasn't. So yeah, he's massacred everybody there. And a little note on that, and I don't know if I picked up on this before. I picked up on the first episode, but this little pink, I think it's a unicorn rucksack he has, seems to follow him everywhere. And he did get his little pink unicorn rucksack. And during this massacre, the entire time he had that sort of hooks over his shoulder, which just changes the effect and quite the sort of gruesome tone that might have been going on, because he was killing a lot of people, and we don't know for sure if every single person in that clinic was necessarily involved in everything that's going on. On that note, just before he did wake up, the sort of what seemed to be the kind of guy in charge of this clinic came in, and then he got a phone call from her. I think they said it's her or something like that, of which he kind of suddenly hastened and had to go and do something. Something along those lines. I might be slightly wrong. But the point is that the person who's calling the shots in terms of this side of things, more to do with this anti-Riker thing, it would seem, is, well, at least a female of some influence. So it'll be interesting to see how that develops and who that might be. Now, the other part of the episode, like I say, is to do with Ortega and mostly her sort of, she didn't have a dinner party, but it was a family party that I think her mum was kind of arranging at Ortega's flat for the Day of the Dead. And one of the things that seems to maybe come with the Day of the Dead in our new Altered Carbon universe is that you might bring back people on that particular day into a sleeve and take them to the party. To which is exactly what Ortega does. A little bit earlier in the episode, a guy, big skinhead white guy looking pretty nasty, comes in and causes a bit of commotion and stuff in the precinct, and she's trying to talk to her mum on the phone and basically sort of, I think, flattens him or whatever and sort of tells him he's a dickhead. She's trying to be on the phone. To which the two guys that sort of brought him in then said they've clocked off and he's now her problem. As things unwind a little bit there, she ends up basically putting her grandma's stack in this guy's sleeve. So now her grandma is actually this big sort of tattooed skinhead, which was quite funny and worked really well actually throughout the episode, sort of seeing this sort of weird sort of juxtaposition of these two characters but in the form of one person, which we've already seen a little bit in this programme, but this certainly really did excel on that. But just before that, prior to this, we did also see Ortega looking into some footage from the dinner party thing she was at the last episode, because there was a guy on there that she saw but didn't register on the camera. And it seems to be that that person is using some sort of kind of almost like live stealth tech, which means he can't be seen by technology to an extent. I don't know to exact what that would range to, but certainly from a visual perspective, it seemed to stop him from being seen. They could slightly see kind of like that, almost like that Predator image when he's using the stealth on the screen. And that sort of, as they were sort of saying, her partner and another police officer that was sort of investigating, some computer guy or whatever, that this is pretty big time, and you know whether it should go up the ranks or not. And we'll see how that progresses. There's little snippets we keep getting from Ortega from other sort of little investigations that she's doing, or kind of, she's not doing them because she's not supposed to be, but she's getting involved in quite a few different things, this being one of them. Also the people dropping out of the sky into the water stuff that we've seen a little bit of, but didn't really seem to get touched on in this particular episode. So that's interesting, again, another little area to see how that evolves and what that is to do with, if it's to do with this whole murder investigation that this sort of series is about. This episode sort of expanded that a bit more. There's much more to this than just that, which we would have expected, but we did get some more of this, which we sort of find out towards the end of this episode. But just going back into the Day of the Dead sort of party, so to speak, there's various sort of conversations again going on about stacks and sleeves and how her mum isn't into it, but her grandma does seem to be, which is interesting that the senior member of the family, who's currently a skinhead, seems to be okay with this, but yet the sort of middle member of the family seems to be the more sort of ultra-orthodox sort of version with the religion, which is sort of a bit interesting, and there might be more into that, or it might be nothing at all, I don't know, but that was still not the usual way things would play out in the modern world. But during this conversation, one of the things that Ortega sort of said when her mum was saying, well, God doesn't want this, she's saying, well, wouldn't God, you know, God made these things happen, you know, God's sort of all powerful to an extent, and, you know, wouldn't he want these sort of things? Wouldn't he want us to find the ancient technology, at least the stacks and the sleeve tech? Wouldn't he want us to find the metals that can be used for this technology? Now, I think maybe this got mentioned a little bit in the first episode. It was interesting that about the ancient technology, and this goes back into what I was saying at the start of my review about this sort of VR stuff that was sort of stone and things, that the guy, the sort of rebel training or whatever it was that Kovacs was part of in the flashbacks. Is that an example of some of this ancient technology? Maybe I'm reading way too much into that, but there's obviously, this tech that seems to be sort of dominating society now isn't something that we came up with as humans. It seems to be something that we've discovered from some ancient civilization, whether that be on Earth or possibly elsewhere in space. I don't know. It may have been explained. If someone does know better than I do there, please point me out and I've kind of missed something. But I think we're getting fed little snippets there, which again is quite interesting. So coming into the sort of the closing scenes and everything, one of the things I sort of forgot to mention actually with Kovacs being at this clinic is they removed the tracking device that was in him, which Ortega had been using to track him, which we obviously thought was all to do with the fact that, which I thought was all sort of to do with the fact that obviously he's sort of a dangerous previous criminal or sort of terrorist, and the fact that he's working with Bancroft and things like that would make her interested. But there's actually more to that. And following Kovacs' sort of massacre of this clinic, that gets called into the police and they sort of turn up, one of which is Ortega. And as she's sort of going around the place, because this is where she's looking at the tracker and can see that it's not quite right, and she finds the tracker, and it's basically, I think it's in the hand or over the finger, and up yours finger, of a decapitated body, which obviously was this Russian interrogator that Kovacs killed earlier. And Kovacs had basically left the tracker there as a bit of a sort of an up yours to, I don't know if he knew it was Ortega, but certainly whoever was tracking him. Ortega obviously discovers this. She knows that Kovacs has been involved because this is his tracker and it's also sort of his kind of thing. So she goes and sees him at the sort of AI brothel thing that he's staying at. So sort of confronting him and like, what the hell are you doing, and this, that and the other. But as we discover there's more to this, and the reason that she's tracking Kovacs isn't because he's Kovacs, but actually because he's Riker, who obviously we know this to an extent because of that's what he was interrogated about. And Riker seems to be Ortega's former partner, I think police partner, but maybe more as well than that. And for whatever reason, which again, I don't know if I've missed that, Kovacs is now in his body. So this guy obviously did something pretty bad, maybe a crime, I guess, or something's happened. But earlier I was saying in the previous review that Ortega has obviously a fair bit of an issue with Bancroft. Well, it seems to be that that's probably a lot to do with the fact that Riker, Kovacs' sort of physical body, has been screwed over, or something's happened. I mean, we'll find out more about this, but there's certainly a lot more to learn here. So in conclusion, I think, as I've said with every single one, another good episode. It's moving along nicely. This episode is just as good as any of the others, to be honest. I've learned a fair bit more of interesting stuff. It is getting very, very murky. Lots of new stuff keeps getting added. I think it's only 10 episodes, this first series, so it'll be interesting to see sort of what they manage to conclude by the end of the series, because conclusions can quite often be the thing that can break a series. Star Trek Discovery being a great example of that at the moment. But going back into this particular episode, like I say, enjoyed it. I've enjoyed it just as much as any of the other episodes. I think I've pretty much given a 7 out of 10 for all of them. So I will give a 7 out of 10 for episode 4 of Altered Carbon.